In a room where the air feels like lead, a woman in a bright orange jumpsuit sits across from the only creature that ever knew her heart. Kaelen Vane is hours away from a lethal injection for a crime that shocked the nation. She didn't ask for a final meal or a priest. She asked for a dog, a retired police beast named Koda, who supposedly turned against her the night the world fell apart. The guards expect a tearful goodbye, but as the heavy steel doors creak open, Koda lunges, his snarl echoing off the concrete walls. This isn't a reunion, it's an investigation. Stay with us, because what this dog found on his owner's skin would flip the switch on the electric chair and expose a truth that shook the prison to its very foundation. The dawn came cold and indifferent, filtering through the reinforced glass of cell block D like a judge's final gavel. Kaelen Vane sat on the edge of her bunk, spine straight, hands folded in her lap, the same posture she'd held for 3 years, 4 months, and 17 days. The orange jumpsuit hung loose on her frame now. She'd stopped eating much after the appeals ran out. Down the corridor, boots echoed in rhythm. 2 sets. Maybe 3. She didn't look up. There was a particular sound to the final walk, a cadence you learned to recognize when you lived close enough to death row. But these steps stopped at her cell, and that meant it wasn't someone else's turn yet. The lock disengaged with a metallic groan. Warden Holloway entered first, his face carved from the same gray stone as the prison walls. Behind him, Assistant Warden Chen carried a clipboard like a shield. They'd done this dance before, 18 times in Kaelen's tenure here. She wondered if it ever got easier for them. "Ms. Vane," Holloway's voice carried the professional distance of a man who'd learned not to see inmates as people. "We're here to confirm your final requests and review the execution protocol." Kaelen's eyes remained fixed on the floor. "I understand." Chen glanced at her clipboard, then at Holloway, then back at the page as if the words might have changed. "Your request for a final meal has been declined by you. No spiritual counsel requested? No family visitation?" "That's correct." "But you did submit one request. You want to see a dog?" The silence that followed felt like the third person in the cell. Warden shifted his weight, the leather of his belt creaking. "Ms. Vane, I have to tell you, in 23 years of corrections work, I've never— Is it approved or not?" Kaelen's voice was steady, empty of everything except the question itself. The warden's jaw tightened. "It's approved, against my better judgment, but the request falls within the parameters of the law." He stepped closer, lowering his voice to something almost human. "But I want you to understand something. That animal was at the warehouse. The surveillance footage shows— I know what the footage shows. Then you know that dog didn't defend you, didn't alert, didn't do a damn thing while you put 3 bullets in Deputy Commissioner Raines." The warden's mask cracked just slightly. "Then why? Why spend your last hour with the one witness who condemned you by doing nothing?" Kaelen looked up then, and for the first time in 3 years, something flickered behind those hollow eyes. Not hope, not quite, something sharper. "Because Koda never lies." The words landed like stones in still water. Chen and Warden exchanged glances, the kind that said they were humoring a dead woman's delusion. "The dog arrives at 900 hours. You have 10 minutes. The door locked behind them, and Kaelen Vane returned her gaze to the floor, her hands still folded, still waiting. But now, for the first time since the verdict, she was counting down to something other than the end. She was counting down to the truth. 3 years ago, Kaelen Vane's name meant something different. It meant the handler who'd taken down the Riverside cartel with nothing but a German shepherd and nerves of steel. It meant 17 commendations, 4 mayoral citations, and a closure weight that made the evening news call her the city's guardian angel with a badge and a leash. Koda had been her shadow through all of it. 80 pounds of precision and loyalty, trained to detect everything from explosives to human remains. Together, they'd cleared buildings that SWAT teams refused to enter. Together, they'd found missing children in places hope had already abandoned. The department called them legendary. The press called them unstoppable. Then came the warehouse on Morrow Street. It was supposed to be routine surveillance, Deputy Commissioner Rains personally overseeing an operation to catch a weapons trafficker red-handed. Kaelen and Koda were assigned perimeter security, nothing more. Just watch, just wait, just be ready. But surveillance footage told a different story. At 11:47 p.m., the cameras captured Kaelen entering the warehouse alone, weapon drawn. At 11:52 p.m., 3 shots. At 11:53 p.m., Deputy Commissioner Rains lay dead in a pool of his own blood, and Kaelen stood over him, gun still smoking. Koda was there, 10 feet away, visible in frame. He didn't attack her, didn't defend the deputy, didn't alert, didn't bark, didn't do a damn thing while his handler, according to every expert witness the prosecution paraded through the courtroom, committed cold-blooded murder. The prosecution's theory was clean, simple, and devastating. Kaelen had been dirty all along, feeding information to the cartels. Rains had discovered her corruption. She eliminated the threat. And Koda? Even the dog knew what she was. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Her sentencing took 6 minutes. The door to cell block D remained locked for 3 years, 4 months, and 17 days. Until this morning. Koda hadn't always been a legend. He was a problem first. 6 years ago, Kaelen found him in the K9 training facility's isolation kennel, the place that they kept the dogs that didn't make the cut. Too aggressive, the trainers said. Too unpredictable. He'd washed out of 2 programs already, deemed unfit for service. One more strike and he'd be transferred to civilian life, or worse. Kaelen saw something different. She saw a dog that had been failed by handlers who didn't understand him, who mistook intensity for instability. She requested him specifically against every supervisor's advice. It took 3 months of 12-hour days before Koda trusted her enough to eat from her hand. 6 months before he took commands without hesitation. A year before they moved like one organism, thinking in tandem, breathing in sync. Then came the night that balanced the ledger. Domestic disturbance call in the warehouse district, supposed to be routine. The man who answered the door seemed calm, cooperative even, until Kaelen stepped inside. She never saw the knife, never saw him move, but Koda did. 70 pounds of trained muscle hit the suspect before the blade reached her throat. The fight lasted 8 seconds. The man survived with 14 stitches and a fractured wrist. Kaelen walked away with nothing but a torn uniform and the understanding that she owed this animal her life. After that, there was no separation between them. Koda slept beside her bed at home, rode in the front seat of her patrol car, stood at her side during every arrest, every search, every moment that mattered. She'd saved him from a kennel. He'd saved her from a grave. And now, in a cell that smelled like disinfectant and despair, Kaelen wondered if there was one more save left between them, one final act of loyalty that could reach across 3 years of silence and speak the truth that surveillance cameras couldn't capture. The transport van arrived at 8:47 a.m., 13 minutes early. Officer Jackson watched from the security checkpoint as the rear doors opened and a civilian handler emerged with a leash that seemed almost ceremonial. The dog that followed moved differently than Jackson expected. Koda was older now. Gray dusted his muzzle like frost, and his gait carried the stiffness of retired muscle. But there was something in the way he held himself that made Jackson's hand drift unconsciously toward his baton. "That's the dog?" Officer Reeves muttered beside him, arms crossed. "Doesn't look like much." But Reeves shifted his weight anyway, took half a step back. Koda's eyes swept the corridor with the methodical precision of a creature that had cleared 1,000 rooms, assessed 1,000 threats. This wasn't a pet being walked through a prison. This was a professional returning to work. Lieutenant Thorne emerged from the observation office, his expression carved from stone. He'd been against this from the beginning, called it a security risk and emotional theater, but the warden had signed off, and Thorne's objections were overruled. Now he stood watching as Koda entered the facility, and something flickered across his face that Jackson couldn't quite identify. Fear? No, too controlled for that. Recognition? Maybe. Keep it tight, Thorne said to no one in particular. 10 minutes, by the book. No extended contact, no exceptions. The civilian handler nodded, but Koda wasn't looking at him. The dog's attention had fixed on something deeper in the building, some scent or memory pulling him forward like a compass finding north. The air in the corridor changed. The fluorescent lights seemed harsher. The space between heartbeats stretched longer. Jackson felt it. Reeves felt it. Even Thorne, standing rigid near the door, felt it. The sentinel had returned, and he hadn't come for a reunion. They brought her to the visitation room at 8:59 a.m. No windows, cinder block walls painted the color of forgotten things. A single metal chair bolted to the floor. Kaelen sat without being told to, her wrists shackled in front of her even though she'd been compliant for 3 years. Protocol, they said, as if a woman 4 hours from death posed a flight risk. The door opened, and Koda entered. For a moment, one fragile, desperate moment, Kaelen forgot how to breathe. He was older, grayer, but still him, still the partner who'd stood beside her through everything, until he didn't. "Koda," she whispered, her voice cracking on the single syllable. The dog froze, his ears pinned back, and a sound emerged from deep in his chest that Kaelen had heard 100 times before, but never directed at her. A low, rumbling growl that spoke of wrongness, of evidence, of something that didn't add up. Officer Jackson's hand went to his weapon. "Control your animal." But the civilian handler raised a palm. "Wait, he's alerting." Koda didn't rush to her, didn't wag his tail or whimper with joy. Instead, he began to circle, slow, methodical, nose working the air in short, precise bursts. This was the behavior he'd shown at crime scenes, at drug busts, at moments that the world was lying and only his senses told the truth. "Koda, it's me." Kaelen leaned forward, chains rattling. "Boy, it's me." But he wasn't looking at her face. His entire focus had narrowed to her left shoulder, to a spot beneath the orange fabric where old scar tissue lay hidden. The growl intensified, and suddenly Koda planted himself, his body rigid in the textbook alert position. Lieutenant Thorne stepped forward from the wall. "That's enough. Remove the animal." Koda's lips curled back, revealing teeth. Not at Kaelen, at Thorne. Koda moved with surgical precision, his nose tracking invisible pathways across Kaelen's shoulder. Then he sat, the formal alert, meaning evidence found, case closed, testimony complete. The civilian handler's face went pale. "He's indicating trauma scent, medical trauma, something penetrative." "There's nothing there," Thorne said, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "We're done here." But Kaelen's hand had already moved to her left shoulder, fingers finding the small circular scar beneath the fabric, a mark she'd discovered 6 months after the warehouse, unexplained and insignificant, a mark she'd assumed was from the chaos of that night. Koda barked once, sharp, demanding, and the warehouse came back like lightning. The weight of the vest, the smell of rust and motor oil, Rains ahead of her in the darkness, his flashlight cutting through shadows. Then a sting, sharp and sudden in her shoulder, her knees buckling, the world tilting sideways. "Officer down," someone shouted, but the voice was wrong, too close, too familiar. Gunshots, 3 of them, not from her weapon. She never drew her weapon. Hands on her arms, lifting her, positioning her, her service pistol pressed into her palm, her finger guided to the trigger guard. Residue transferred, evidence manufactured. She did it. The dog saw everything. Koda barking somewhere in the distance, frantic, desperate. But when she opened her eyes again, hours later in a hospital bed with cuffs on her wrists, the narrative had already been written. Kaelen's breath came in short gasps now, her eyes wide with the horror of understanding. "They drugged me. Someone injected me." "Ridiculous," Thorne said, but he'd moved closer to the door. Officer Jackson noticed, so did Reeves. Koda's attention swung away from Kaelen, his body coiling like a spring, his nose lifted, sampling the air, cross-referencing a scent memory 3 years old. Then his eyes locked on Officer Jackson, and the growl returned, deeper this time, accusatory.
Koda didn't bark, didn't lunge. He simply walked to Officer Jackson and sat, his nose pointed directly at the guard's right hand, the same formal alert he'd given at Kaelen's shoulder. Jackson stumbled backward, his face draining of color. "Get that thing away from me!" He's indicating the same scent profile, the civilian handler said, his voice climbing with excitement and horror. The same trauma signature he found on her. This officer was there. "I'm assigned here," Jackson stammered. "Of course I'm here." "No." Kaelen stood slowly, chains dragging. "You were at the warehouse. You were there that night." The room went silent, except for Koda's breathing. Measured, patient, certain. Jackson's hand trembled near his belt. His eyes darted to Thorne, then to the door, calculating distances and outcomes. The math didn't work in his favor. "Lieutenant, Shut up," Thorne snapped. But something in Jackson broke. Maybe it was the dog's unwavering stare. Maybe it was 3 years of carrying weight that was never meant to be his alone. "I didn't know they were going to kill him. I swear to God, I didn't know." Officer Reeves took a step back, hand moving to his radio. "Raines was investigating us," Jackson continued, words tumbling out like a confession that had been damned too long. "The off-books operations, the evidence we'd been moving. He was going to blow everything wide open. Thorne said we just needed to contain it, to make it look like someone else. I said shut up." Thorne's voice cut like a blade, but Jackson was past stopping now. "We used the injection on her, ketamine and sedative. Thorne shot Raines while she was going down. We staged it, put her gun in her hand. The dog was locked in a back room until it was over." Koda remained sitting, his testimony complete, his partner vindicated. Thorne moved before anyone could process Jackson's confession. His hand went to his waistband, not for the regulation sidearm on his hip, but for something smaller, concealed, a backup piece that shouldn't have been in an execution wing, the kind of weapon that existed off the books, like the operations he'd been running for years. Koda saw it first. The dog exploded forward, 80 pounds of retired muscle moving with the speed of something that had never forgotten its purpose. He hit Thorne's arm as the lieutenant's hand cleared leather, jaws clamping down with the precision of 6 years of training and 3 years' worth of waiting for this exact moment. The gun clattered across the floor. Thorne roared, swinging his free hand at the dog, but Koda held firm, dragging the lieutenant down. Officer Reeves fumbled for his radio, shouting codes that would bring the entire facility running. Jackson stood frozen, hands raised, his confession still hanging in the air like smoke. "Don't move!" Reeves had his weapon drawn now, but the scene was chaos. Man and dog tangled together, Kaelen shackled to a chair, Jackson between him and everything. The civilian handler lunged for Thorne's dropped weapon, securing it before anyone else could reach it. Thorne thrashed, desperation replacing the calculated control he'd worn for 3 years. "You can't prove anything. It's a dog's word against mine, against the evidence, against everything. Against my testimony," Jackson said quietly. His hands were still raised, but his voice carried the strange peace of someone who'd finally stopped running. "I'll testify. All of it. The operations, the frame, the injection, everything." Koda released Thorne's arm and backed toward Kaelen, positioning himself between his handler and the threat. His muzzle was flecked with blood, but his eyes were clear. The door burst open. More guards flooded in, weapons drawn, shouting contradictory orders into a room where the truth had finally stopped hiding. The governor's call came at 10:47 a.m., 43 minutes before the scheduled execution. Stay of execution. Immediate investigation. Jackson's confession corroborated by forensic teams who found the puncture wound scar, who tested for chemical residue that 3-year-old tissue shouldn't still carry, but did. Thorne's backup weapon matched to ballistics from the Raines murder, a detail that had been conveniently omitted from the original investigation. The machinery of justice that had ground Kaelen down for 3 years suddenly reversed direction with the same indifferent efficiency. By noon, the shackles were off. By 2 p.m., the charges were dropped. By 4 p.m., she was signing release papers with hands that didn't quite feel like their own. The sun was setting when Kaelen Vane walked through the front gates of the correctional facility. The sky had turned orange and gold, painting the world in colors she'd forgotten existed beyond concrete and fluorescent lights. The air tasted different out here, bigger somehow, full of possibilities that had been theoretical for so long they'd stopped feeling real. Koda walked beside her, no leash,
no handler. The civilian had signed the transfer papers without hesitation. "He's yours," the man said. "Always was." They reached the parking lot, and Kaelen stopped. Her legs wouldn't carry her farther, not yet. She knelt on the asphalt, and Koda pressed against her, the way he used to after difficult operations when they both needed to remember they were alive. "You didn't forget," she whispered into his fur. "You never forgot." Koda's tail moved once, twice, a rhythm like forgiveness, like vindication, like the steady beat of loyalty that survived 3 years of silence and never wavered. Behind them, the prison stood like a monument to everything that almost been their ending. Ahead, the road stretched toward a horizon where the sun was rising on a second chance neither of them should have had, but both of them had earned. Kaelen Vane stood, Koda at her side, and took the first step of the long walk home.